Hello, and thank you for attending this presentation. My name is Dominic Carroll. I'm the Director of Portfolio at E2E Assure, and I'm responsible for our threat detection and response services, which we provide from our Security Operations Centre in the UK, which we use to protect a range of clients across various industries, including education. Today, I'm going to run through how cyber criminals are evolving their attack campaigns and how defenders working in security operations centres need to adjust their operational focus to disrupt attacks before significant negative impacts occur. Before we dive into that, let's take a quick refresh on what's unique about the education sector when we're talking about cybersecurity. One of the challenges we hear constantly when we talk about cybersecurity for education is around budget constraints. Cybersecurity budgets in educational institutions tend to be a smaller percentage of those in a corporate environment. And perhaps the reasoning behind that is that it's easier for corporate organizations to assess risk against profits and market share than it is for an educational institution to justify spend when the risk is considered at an individual institution level. But what we see on this slide, taken from the report in 2021, is that when the holistic view is taken, and in this case, it's only looking at higher education, then the risk to our future economy is very significant. When we think about the impact of a successful cyber attack on critical national infrastructure providers, such as water or power, it's easy to understand the immediate major impact to a significant portion of the population. And while the successful breach of an educational institution has potential immediate impact on students, staff, or stakeholders in high-value research projects, the longer-term detriment to the country as a whole is a bit more subtle, but it's still as concerning. And this is potentially another avenue for adversary nation states to take in reducing our prosperity and academic standing in the world through a sustained campaign to hinder academic progress, increase skill shortages, and neutralize the value of research-driven intellectual property. So there's a definite need to treat education as a treasured asset and driver of our economy, but why is it so challenging to protect? So this is a whole topic in itself that could easily take up over an hour, but I'll just touch on the high-level points to set the scene before moving into threats and operations. So the first major and off-cited challenge is scale, which in this case provides a vast attack surface for cyber criminals to go at, millions and millions of identities and devices. Second is complexity. There's difficulty in introducing standards as students use their own devices, and institutions are vastly interconnected to each other, international partners, and industry. And then there's the potential values of the ill-gotten gains, which puts education in the crosshairs of a range of adversaries, from common cyber criminals looking to sell personal data records, to more sophisticated hackers looking to initiate fraudulent financial transfers. And then there's a nation-state-operated threat actors who are after an intellectual property created out of cutting-edge research. Now, the cyber criminal underworld operates as a well-organized but unregulated economy, and there are groups which specialize in different sectors, and education has its own own group of break-in specialists. This is from a report produced by Malwarebytes, and it shows that the standout gun for hire for compromising the education sector is a group going by the name of Byte Society, who are believed to be based in Russia, and they have hit a lot of institutions in the UK, as well as the US and Europe. They will keep themselves up to date with how education institutions are connected and organized, and they create repeatable processes around that, which they use to drive attack campaigns. So I guess the question is, what good does it do us to know this? Now, some of you will have heard of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It's a taxonomy for describing the tactics and techniques that have been observed being used by different threat actor groups to infiltrate organizations' digital environments. And for the purpose of this discussion, I've abstracted out the most pertinent MITRE tactics, from credential access to data encryption, and I'll walk through a simplified English language description of the objectives and target outcomes at each stage. Starting with credential access, the goal here is to get valid account details, which can be used to access a jumping off point. So credential harvesting and credential stuffing are techniques used to try known compromised user credentials, which have been gained from other websites, for example, to see if the user consistently uses the same password. Phishing campaigns and site spoofing can also be used to trick users into providing their details. Once the threat actor has access to a user device, they'll start mapping out user infrastructure, looking for bigger targets and opportunities to compromise additional accounts that have greater permissions. The holy grail being admin accounts on domain controllers. Now, there are detailed descriptions of different techniques and tools that are commonly used at each stage. And these days, a lot of these are what are referred to as living off the land, meaning that the attacker will use the built-in tools that come with operating systems so as to go undetected by the less sophisticated endpoint protection tools. And then the final step is for the attacker to get a copy of the target data uploaded to their external storage space, and then encrypt a local copy of the data in readiness for ransomware negotiations. But if we know and understand the methods used by cybercriminals, why is it that they are still successfully deploying ransomware into educational networks? To articulate what we at HB Assure are seeing in the field, let's take that previous attack scenario and apply it to a typical SOC operation. So we're using this simplified IT infrastructure setup, which depicts a user endpoint device that has access to a network where there are servers with some data which is valuable to a threat actor. Now, the user endpoint device has a detection and response agent installed, but crucially, this is only deployed in what we call audit mode. Now, events and alerts may be generated and sent to a central security incident and event management platform for logging, but if the alert is not tuned to the correct priority or using an outdated rule set, this won't be enough to raise a critical incident in many cases. So when the hackers use tactics and techniques in this scenario to gain initial access, an alert might be generated, but no containment action is triggered on the endpoint. And the alert might sit in a pile of higher priority alerts vying for analyst attention. So this gives the attacker plenty of time to jump off from the initial entry point and find areas of the infrastructure where it's easier to move around undetected. Now, when the attacker is ready to complete the campaign, they will look to set up communication through a remote control server in preparation for the final stages. Now, these communications are relatively straightforward to detect, and it's often at this stage that the SOC tools will correlate to the previous lower-level alerts with the more overt signals and raise a higher priority incident for alert analyst triage. And it's at this point that the SOC escalation chain kicks in, and depending on the time of day, the day of the week, it may take several hours before approval is given by the named authority to take containment actions. And what we are observing is that attackers are moving much quicker from initial access to data encryption, meaning that in this scenario, attackers may have already completed their objective before containment measures are activated. So what is the alternative approach? Using the same example scenario, this is how we apply automation into the security operation to disrupt attackers before they can have a campus-wide negative impact. So when the appropriate rule sets and automation are implemented to detect anomalous account activity, rogue processes, or malware, rather than wait for an analyst to manually take action further down the chain, the account is immediately temporarily disabled, or the endpoint is temporarily isolated from the network. So the SOC analysts are alerted to a high priority incident, which is then triaged as being a true or a false positive. If it does happen to be a false positive, the account is re-enabled or the device is released from isolation. If it's a true positive, then the next steps in the response process are activated. The big concerns and questions that get raised by new clients when we discuss our approach to attack disruption is how to minimize the business impact of false positives that are disabling user accounts and isolated machines. So to address this, of course, we have a continual drive for tuning and optimization of detection rules, but a key process for us is onboarding as much historical log data as possible into our SOC platform. Our analysts can then run the analytics over that historical data and observe which alerts would have triggered automatic attack disruption rules, and then we can tune retrospectively before going live with that more assertive automation. Now, the ratio of automated responses varies from different environments, but as an example, a recent engagement where we downloaded 90 days of historical data generated 10,000 events, and of these, 7 would have triggered automatic responses, which would have impacted 3 devices and 2 user accounts, and only 1 of these was false positive. Now, for us, that speaks to the effectiveness and fidelity of our detection rules, which we obviously continually update to keep track of the latest attacker tactics and techniques. But what if you're at the beginning of your SOC journey and are looking to increase the effectiveness of the operation? How can you understand where you are and recognize the milestones to navigate to where you need to get to? As with any plan, it's important to be clear on what you're looking to achieve. And at the highest level, the SOC should be looking to detect and stop attacks before they have serious negative consequences. So continue asking these 3 questions that are focused on the objective of preventing successful attacks in a rapidly evolving and changing threat landscape is crucial to maintaining focus on how effective the SOC operation really is. So where to start and how to evolve? So let's first look at the difficulty for attackers to evade detections. The image here shows a conceptual model, the pyramid of pain, commonly used to describe how effective threat intelligence on indicators of threat activity is when applied at increasing levels of sophistication. I won't go into great detail, but hopefully it's apparent that if you are only basing your threat detection rules on file hash values and IP addresses, then you are viewed as a very easy target by an attacker. At the top end of the pyramid, we have the tactics, techniques, and procedures used by known threat actors and described by the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which makes it tough for an attacker to bypass, as they have to invest in a whole new operating model to have any hope of going undetected. So detection indicators is just one of many components that form part of an effective threat detection and response operation. So what are the other components, and does this model apply to them? What we've created here is a threat detection and attack disruption maturity model. The trivial to tough rankings from the pyramid of pain are the column headings, and in the first row are the same detection indicators from that pyramid of pain. And it's important to recognize that sophisticated detection indicators will not be as effective if only deployed to a small proportion of your total attack surface. Hence, the next row applies that same ranking to the breadth, scale, and sophistication of log analysis, ranging from basic device log aggregation to full-on correlated behavioral analytics, traffic analysis, and cyber deception. Now, what to do with the alerts from all that coverage comes next. So attack disruption is a measure of how quickly an attack can be contained, and at the challenging and tough end of this scale, this relies on how assertively the built-in automation capabilities of the more sophisticated SOC tools are activated. Next, for those organizations that have Microsoft 365 Defender, Secure Score is a simple means to get a view on how well hardened the configuration of your environment is. Other posture maturity models and attack surface reduction scoring methodologies are available. To be a challenging target, you want to be aiming at an equivalent secure score of greater than 65%. And the final row in the table is testing and simulations. This is crucial to being able to answer the question of how quickly you can detect and disrupt attacker activity. So without validating that your detection rules will fire when expected and measuring how long it takes to contain threats, you can't be sure that your initial SOC implementation is still functioning as expected. Now, attackers evolve their tactics, infrastructures expand and contract, users change roles and move data. So this needs to be a regular activity to ensure operational effectiveness. If I was to be asked what would be the quickest win on the maturity model to becoming a tougher target for an attacker, I'd say increasing your attack disruption capability. Ensuring that you can detect signs of user account abuse and endpoint compromise and have implemented the corresponding disruption automation and processes will go a long way to reducing the risk of you being the next victim of a ransomware campaign. So earlier we asked, what are the questions that matter for threat detection response? And now that we're at the other side of this deep dive, let's review some of the metrics and processes which help us answer those questions. So mean time to detect and mean time to respond are fairly well-known measures of SOC effectiveness, which are important, but are not the whole story. Mean time to analytic is not a commonly used term, but it's one that should be considered to measure how quickly actionable threat intelligence is transformed into protective analytics to trigger alerts on attacker signals. The second crucial area to understanding how quickly you can detect and disrupt attacker activity is to implement regular detection surface validation. And what we're looking to do here is to ensure that the data sources used are the correct ones for the coverage we're looking for and are correctly configured to do so, that the data sources are still working, that analytics trigger when expected to against threat hunts and adversary emulations, and that the use cases and analytics are still relevant to the latest state of the threat environment. So if we bring all that together, what does the target SOC service schematic for threat detection and response look like? So this is how we represent our portfolio of threat detection and response services at E2E Assure. So in the box on the left, in security operations, we have the core operating modules, which scale in size and complexity, depending on the detection surface options that are enabled. The boxes to the right are the detection surface modules, which are organized by target outcome and typically ranking complexity, with the simplest at the top and the more complex at the bottom of the stack. Now, at E2E Assure, we believe that every organization, at a minimum, should be running threat detection and attack disruption on anomalous account activity that indicates an account takeover threat. And this is what we cover in our modern workplace protection module. User accounts these days are commonly referred to as the new attack perimeter. And the reason for this is because that is the point of initial access in the world of cloud and remote and hybrid learning. So that concludes this presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions in the chat.